Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. In a world where strength is often measured by size and rank, one female soldier proved that true power comes from skill, determination, and the courage to stand up for what's right. This is the story of how 5 seconds changed everything for everyone who witnessed it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado, California. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear as she prepared for another day of advanced combat training. At 5 feet 4 inches and 130 pounds, she didn't look like the typical image of an elite warrior. But appearances, as many would soon learn, could be dangerously deceiving. Sarah had spent the last 8 years clawing her way through every obstacle the military had thrown at her. From basic training, where drill sergeants questioned whether a little girl belonged in their ranks, to specialized combat schools where she was often the only woman in a class of 50 men. Each challenge had only made her stronger, more determined, and more skilled. The training facility buzzed with activity as members of SEAL Team 7 prepared for their monthly joint training exercise with other special operations units. These sessions were designed to test interoperability between different branches and specialties, bringing together the best of the best from across the military spectrum. Commander Derek Thompson strutted across the training mat with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged. At 6 feet 2 inches and 210 pounds of muscle, he commanded respect through intimidation rather than leadership. His record spoke for itself. 15 years as a Navy SEAL, multiple combat deployments, and a reputation for being one of the most physically imposing operators in the teams. But Thompson carried something else with his impressive resume, an attitude problem that had been growing worse over the years. He believed that certain people didn't belong in special operations, and he wasn't shy about expressing those views. Female operators, in particular, were a frequent target of his criticism and harassment. Sarah had heard the stories about Thompson long before she ever met him. Other female service members had warned her about his behavior, his inappropriate comments, and his tendency to use his rank and reputation to intimidate anyone he saw as beneath him. She had hoped those stories were exaggerated, but as she watched him interact with the other trainees that morning, she realized they might have been understated. The training scenario for the day was close quarters combat, a specialty that required not just physical strength, but technique, timing, and mental acuity. Sarah excelled in this area, having spent countless hours perfecting her skills under the guidance of some of the best martial arts instructors the military had to offer. As the group gathered for the initial briefing, Thompson's eyes locked on Sarah. She could see the dismissive look in his expression, the way he sized her up like she was some kind of joke. She had seen that look before, from countless men who underestimated her based on her appearance. "All right, people," called out the training coordinator, Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez. "Today we're working on close quarters combat scenarios. We'll be rotating through different stations, practicing various techniques and situations. Remember, this is training, but we train like we fight." The first few rotations went smoothly. Sarah demonstrated her skills at each station, earning nods of approval from the instructors and respectful acknowledgement from most of her fellow trainees. She executed throws with precision, countered attacks with lightning-fast reflexes, and showed a level of technical proficiency that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Thompson, however, seemed to grow more agitated with each demonstration of Sarah's abilities. During water breaks, she could hear him making snide comments to his teammates about diversity hires and political correctness run amok. His voice carried just enough for her to hear, but not loud enough for the instructors to catch. As the morning progressed, the tension in the air became palpable. Other trainees began to notice Thompson's behavior, some looking uncomfortable with his obvious harassment of Sarah. A few of the more senior enlisted men tried to redirect his attention, but Thompson was clearly building up to something. The breaking point came during the hand-to-hand combat rotation. Trainees were paired off to practice defensive techniques against various attacks. Sarah found herself partnered with Staff Sergeant Mike Chun, a respectful and professional Army Ranger who had worked with female operators before. As they worked through their drills, Thompson positioned himself nearby, making increasingly loud and inappropriate comments about Sarah's technique, her place in the military, and what he saw as the lowering of standards to accommodate women in combat roles. Maybe she should try out for the dance team instead, Thompson said loudly enough for the entire group to hear. I hear they're looking for people who can move around real pretty like. Several trainees shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. The culture of military training often discouraged interference with what might be seen as motivational harassment, even when it clearly crossed the line into something more sinister. Sarah maintained her composure, continuing her drills with Chun while internally calculating her options. She could report Thompson's behavior through official channels, but she knew how those complaints often went: lengthy investigations, questions about her own motivations, and the potential for retaliation that could damage her career. Thompson, emboldened by the lack of pushback, decided to escalate further. During a brief pause in the training, he approached Sarah directly, positioning himself uncomfortably close to her. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said with a condescending smile. I've been watching you all morning, and I got some advice. This isn't really the place for someone like you. Maybe you'd be happier in a support role, somewhere you won't have to pretend to be something you're not." Sarah looked up at him calmly. "Thank you for your input, Commander. I'll take it under advisement." Her professional response seemed to irritate Thompson even more. He had expected her to either back down or react emotionally, giving him additional ammunition to use against her. "I don't think you understand," Thompson continued, moving even closer. "This isn't about being politically correct or giving everyone a participation trophy. This is about life and death situations where people's lives depend on having the strongest, most capable operators possible. And, honey, that just isn't you." The training area had grown quiet as other service members began to notice the confrontation. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the obvious harassment, but unsure how to intervene. Others watched with interest, curious to see how the situation would unfold. Sarah remained calm, but those who knew her well could see the subtle signs that she was preparing for whatever came next. Her stance shifted almost imperceptibly, her weight balanced evenly on both feet. Her hands, which had been clasped behind her back, moved to a more neutral position at her sides. "Commander," she said evenly, "I appreciate your concern for operational effectiveness. I think you'll find that my record speaks for itself." Thompson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your record? Sweetheart, I've been doing this since before you could spell military. I've seen dozens of people like you come and go, thinking they can hang with the big boys until reality hits them in the face." He stepped closer again, now clearly invading her personal space in a way that was both unprofessional and threatening. "Maybe it's time someone gave you a reality check about what real operators are capable of." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Around the training area, conversations stopped as everyone focused on the confrontation. Even the instructors had begun to notice something was happening, though they were too far away to hear the specific words being exchanged. Sarah looked up at Thompson with steady eyes. She had reached a decision point that would define not just this moment, but potentially her entire future in special operations. She could walk away, report the incident, and hope for the best through official channels. Or she could address the problem directly, right here and now. "Commander," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "Are you challenging me to demonstrate my capabilities?" Thompson's grin widened. He had backed her into exactly the corner he wanted. "I'm saying maybe it's time to see if you can back up all this tough talk with actual performance. Unless, of course, you'd rather run along and find someone to complain to about the mean man who hurt your feelings." The moment hung in the air like a charged electrical field. Everyone within earshot could feel the tension, the sense that something significant was about to happen. Some of the more experienced operators recognized the signs of a confrontation that was about to move beyond words. Sarah nodded slowly. "Very well, Commander. I accept your challenge." The training mat that had been bustling with activity just minutes before now served as an impromptu arena. Word of the confrontation had spread quickly through the facility, and service members from various units began to gather around the edges of the mat, forming an unofficial circle around Sarah and Thompson. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had noticed the commotion and was making his way toward the scene, but The crowd of onlookers made it difficult for him to see exactly what was happening. By the time he could push through to get a clear view, events were already in motion. Thompson removed his gear and stepped onto the mat with the swagger of a man who had never lost a physical confrontation. He had size, strength, experience, and the confidence that came from years of dominating others through intimidation and force. Sarah removed her own gear methodically, her movements precise and controlled. She showed no signs of nervousness or hesitation, only the focused calm of someone preparing to execute a plan she had already worked out in her mind. "All right, little lady," Thompson called out loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "Let's see what you've got. Try not to get hurt." The circle of observers grew larger as more service members arrived to witness what was shaping up to be a legendary confrontation. Among them were seasoned operators who had seen Sarah train before, and they knew that Thompson was about to receive an education he would never forget. Sarah stepped onto the mat and faced Thompson with quiet confidence. She had spent years preparing for moments like this. Not just the physical confrontation, but the deeper challenge of proving that skill and determination could overcome size and arrogance. As the two fighters squared off in the center of the mat, the training facility fell silent except for the sound of breathing and the distant hum of air conditioning. Everyone present understood they were about to witness something significant, though most had no idea just how dramatically the next few seconds would change their understanding of what real strength looked like. Thompson raised his hands in a boxing stance, his muscles tensed and ready to overwhelm his much smaller opponent. He had already planned his approach, a quick, decisive takedown that would end the fight before it really began, proving his point about the physical realities of combat operations. Sarah settled into her own stance, one that looked deceptively casual to those unfamiliar with advanced martial arts techniques. Her hands were up but relaxed, her feet positioned for maximum mobility and leverage. The moment stretched out like a held breath, with dozens of eyes focused on the two figures in the center of the mat. In the crowd, some service members were quietly placing bets on how long Sarah would last against the much larger SEAL commander. Most estimated it would be over in less than 30 seconds. They were right about the timing, but completely wrong about the outcome. What happened next will be talked about in military training facilities for years to come, becoming the stuff of legend and fundamentally changing how many people thought about strength, skill, and the true meaning of being a warrior. In less than 5 seconds, everything Thompson thought he knew about combat, about women in the military, and about his own invincibility would be shattered on the training mat in front of dozens of witnesses. The confrontation that had been building all morning was about to reach its explosive conclusion, and Sarah Martinez was ready to deliver a lesson that Derek Thompson would never forget. Thompson moved first, exactly as Sarah had expected he would. His approach was textbook aggressive male dominance, a charging rush designed to use his superior size and weight to overwhelm his opponent before she could mount any meaningful defense. He had used this same technique countless times before against smaller opponents, and it had never failed him. But Sarah Martinez was not like any opponent Thompson had ever faced. As Thompson lunged forward with his full body weight behind the attack, Sarah seemed to simply disappear from where she had been standing. In reality, she had executed a perfect lateral movement, stepping aside at precisely the right moment while simultaneously grabbing Thompson's extended arm. What happened next was a masterclass in applied physics and martial arts technique. Using Thompson's own momentum against him, Sarah pivoted on her right foot while pulling his arm in the direction he was already moving. The larger man, unable to stop his forward motion, found himself suddenly off balance and vulnerable. Thompson's eyes widened in surprise as he realized he was no longer in control of the situation. His superior size, which he had counted on to intimidate and overwhelm, now worked against him as Sarah redirected all that mass and momentum with surgical precision. In one fluid motion that seemed to happen in slow motion to the mesmerized onlookers, Sarah completed the technique. She swept Thompson's legs out from under him while maintaining control of his arm, sending all 210 pounds of the SEAL commander crashing to the mat with a thunderous impact that echoed through the training facility. But Sarah wasn't finished. As Thompson hit the ground, she maintained her grip on his arm and smoothly transitioned into a joint lock that left him completely immobilized. In less than 3 seconds, she had taken control of the fight so completely that Thompson couldn't even attempt to get back to his feet. The training facility erupted in stunned silence, then excited murmurs as the witnesses processed what they had just seen. Thompson, the intimidating SEAL commander who had seemed so confident just moments before, was now lying on his back on the training mat, held in place by a woman half his size. "Do you yield, Commander?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd. Thompson's face was a mask of shock and humiliation. He tried to move to escape the joint lock, but Sarah's technique was flawless. Any attempt to struggle only increased the pressure on his arm and shoulder, making his position more uncomfortable and more embarrassing. "I said, do you yield?" Sarah repeated, applying just enough additional pressure to make her point clear. "I yield," Thompson gasped, his voice barely audible. Sarah immediately released the hold and stepped back, offering her hand to help Thompson to his feet. It was a gesture of respect and professionalism that highlighted the difference between a true warrior and a mere bully. Thompson ignored the offered hand and scrambled to his feet on his own, his face burning with embarrassment and anger. Around the mat, the crowd of observers buzzed with excited conversation as they replayed the lightning-fast sequence of events in their minds. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez finally pushed through the crowd and stepped onto the mat, his expression a mixture of concern and amazement. He had arrived just in time to see the final moments of the confrontation, and he was struggling to process what he had witnessed. "What exactly is going on here?" Rodriguez demanded, looking back and forth between Sarah and Thompson. Before Thompson could speak, several of the witnesses began talking at once, each eager to describe what they had seen. The story that emerged was consistent across multiple accounts. Thompson had challenged Sarah to a physical confrontation, and she had accepted and won decisively in a matter of seconds. Rodriguez looked at Thompson, whose face was still flushed with humiliation. "Commander Thompson, is this accurate?" Thompson's jaw worked silently for a moment as he struggled with his response. His entire identity was built around his physical dominance and his superiority over others, especially women. What had just happened challenged everything he believed about himself and his place in the military hierarchy. "She got lucky," Thompson finally muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. Several of the observers snorted in derision at this claim. What they had witnessed wasn't luck. It was skill, training, and technique executed at the highest level. "Commander," Rodriguez said sternly, "I want to see you in my office immediately after training concludes. We need to discuss appropriate professional conduct." Thompson nodded stiffly and walked away from the mat, pushing through the crowd without making eye contact with anyone. His departure was met with a mixture of relief and continued amazement from the other trainees. Rodriguez turned to Sarah, who had remained calm and professional throughout the entire incident. "Master Chief Martinez, are you injured?" "No, sir," Sarah replied. "I'm ready to continue with training." "Very well," Rodriguez said. "Let's get back to our scheduled activities. Everyone else, back to your stations." As the crowd began to disperse, many of the service members made a point of approaching Sarah to offer their congratulations and respect. What she had done went beyond just winning a physical confrontation. She had stood up to a bully and proven that skill could triumph over size and intimidation. Staff Sergeant Chun, who had been Sarah's training partner before the confrontation, shook his head in amazement. "Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah smiled modestly. "Years of training. My instructors always taught me that technique beats strength when it's applied correctly." "That wasn't just technique," said Petty Officer First Class James Washington, a SEAL from Thompson's own team. "That was artistry. I've never seen anyone move that fast or that precisely." The praise was gratifying, but Sarah knew that the real impact of what had happened would unfold over the following days and weeks. Word of Thompson's defeat would spread throughout the special operations community, and her actions would be analyzed, discussed, and debated in training facilities across the country. More importantly, The incident would serve as a powerful example for other female service members who face similar challenges and harassment. Sarah had proven that standing up to bullies wasn't just possible. It could be done with skill, professionalism, and dignity. As training resumed, Sarah noticed a marked change in the atmosphere around her. The respectful acknowledgement she had earned before was now enhanced by a deeper level of professional recognition. Her fellow trainees weren't just being polite. They genuinely recognized her as an elite operator who deserved to be there. The remaining training sessions that day proceeded without incident. Thompson had left the facility entirely, citing a sudden illness that fooled no one. His absence created a noticeably more positive and professional environment for everyone involved. During the lunch break, Sarah found herself surrounded by curious service members who wanted to understand more about her background and training. She answered their questions openly, describing the years of martial arts training, the countless hours of practice, and the mental preparation that had made her victory possible. The thing people don't understand, Sarah explained to a group of attentive listeners, is that size is just one factor in combat effectiveness. Speed, technique, timing, and mental preparation are often more important than raw strength. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, one of the few other female operators in the group, nodded appreciatively. You just showed every woman in the military that we don't have to accept harassment and intimidation. We can fight back and win. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, who approached Sarah with a serious expression. Master Chief, I need to speak with you privately. Sarah followed Rodriguez to a quiet corner of the facility, wondering if she was about to face official consequences for her actions. Military discipline was strict about unauthorized physical altercations, even when they were clearly justified. Master Chief, Rodriguez began, I want you to know that I've spoken with several witnesses about what happened this morning. The consensus is clear. Commander Thompson initiated the confrontation and challenged you to a physical demonstration. Your response was both appropriate and professional. Sarah felt a wave of relief. Thank you, sir. I was concerned about potential disciplinary action. On the contrary, Rodriguez continued, I want to commend you for the way you handled a difficult situation. You demonstrated exactly the kind of professionalism and skill we want to see from our elite operators. He paused for a moment, then added, I should also tell you that Commander Thompson has been relieved of his training duties pending a full investigation into his conduct. Several other service members have come forward with complaints about his behavior over the past few months. This news didn't surprise Sarah. Bullies rarely targeted just one person, and Thompson's behavior toward her was likely part of a larger pattern of inappropriate conduct. The incident this morning was the final straw, Rodriguez explained. His superiors have been looking for a reason to address his behavior problems, and this gave them the justification they needed. As Sarah returned to the training area, she reflected on the broader implications of what had happened. One moment of standing up for herself had not only ended Thompson's harassment, but had also opened the door for other victims to come forward and seek justice. The afternoon training sessions focused on team-based scenarios, and Sarah found herself naturally emerging as a leader within her group. Her demonstration of skill and courage that morning had earned her a level of respect that transcended rank and gender. During a complex hostage rescue simulation, Sarah's tactical suggestions were listened to carefully and implemented by her teammates. Her small stature, which Thompson had seen as a weakness, proved to be an advantage in certain scenarios where stealth and agility were more valuable than brute force. Observed Lieutenant Tom Bradley, a young Marine officer, I never really thought about how different body types could be tactical advantages in different situations. You can get into spaces and move in ways that would be impossible for someone Thompson's size. It was exactly the kind of insight Sarah had been hoping to inspire. Too often, military thinking focused solely on traditional measures of physical strength, while ignoring the diverse capabilities that different operators could bring to a team. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed that the story of her confrontation with Thompson was spreading beyond the immediate training group. Service members from other units began approaching her with questions and comments, and she realized that the incident was becoming something of a legend. The speed and decisiveness of her victory had captured everyone's imagination. In a culture that respected physical prowess and combat skill, what Sarah had accomplished was the equivalent of David defeating Goliath, but with superior technique rather than divine intervention. By the end of the training day, Sarah had received invitations to demonstrate her techniques at other facilities and requests for private instruction from service members who wanted to improve their own close-quarters combat skills. The incident that had started as harassment had transformed into an unexpected career opportunity. More importantly, Sarah had proven to herself and others that standing up to bullies and harassers was not only possible, but could be done with dignity and professionalism. She had refused to be intimidated or driven away from her chosen career, instead choosing to address the problem directly and decisively. As she packed her gear at the end of the day, Sarah reflected on the conversation she would have that evening with her husband, also a military officer who had always supported her career despite the challenges she faced as a woman in special operations. The story she would tell him wasn't just about a physical confrontation or a moment of personal vindication. It was about changing perceptions, challenging assumptions, and proving that true strength came not from size or intimidation, but from skill, preparation, and the courage to do what was right. The impact of those 5 seconds on the training mat would extend far beyond the immediate participants, inspiring other women to pursue careers in special operations and forcing the military establishment to reconsider their assumptions about what made an effective warrior. But for Sarah Martinez, the most important outcome was simpler. She had stood her ground, defended her honor, and proven that she belonged exactly where she was. The ripple effects of Sarah's victory over Commander Thompson began almost immediately and spread throughout the military community like wildfire. Within hours of the incident, cell phone videos taken by witnesses had found their way to secure military networks and social media platforms. The 5-second confrontation that had seemed so brief and contained was now being viewed and discussed by service members around the world. Admiral Patricia Hayes, the first woman to command naval special warfare, received a detailed briefing about the incident within 24 hours. As she reviewed the multiple witness statements and video evidence, she recognized the significance of what had occurred. This wasn't just another training altercation. It was a watershed moment that could reshape discussions about women in combat roles. This Martinez, Admiral Hayes, said to her aide, Commander Lisa Park, "Tell me more about her background." Commander Park pulled up Sarah's service record on her tablet. Exceptional performer across the board, Admiral. Top of her class in advanced combat training, multiple commendations for leadership and tactical innovation, and stellar performance reviews from every commanding officer she served under. Any previous issues with harassment or discrimination? Hayes asked. Nothing officially reported, but her informal feedback consistently mentions challenges related to being a woman in special operations. She's apparently developed a reputation for handling difficult situations with professionalism and skill. Admiral Hayes nodded thoughtfully. She had fought many of the same battles during her own rise through the ranks, though she had rarely had the opportunity to address them as decisively as Sarah had. The incident presented both an opportunity and a potential crisis for the Navy's ongoing efforts to integrate women into special operations roles. "I want a full investigation into Thompson's conduct history," Hayes ordered, "and I want recommendations for how we can use this incident constructively to improve our training and professional development programs." Meanwhile, at naval special warfare facilities across the country, the story of Sarah's confrontation was being retold with increasing embellishment and detail. Each retelling seemed to make Thompson larger and more intimidating, while Sarah's technique became more spectacular and impressive. At the Naval Special Warfare Center in Virginia Beach, Instructor Chief Petty Officer Robert "Tank" Johnson was using the incident as a teaching moment for a new class of SEAL candidates. Tank, a massive man who had earned his nickname through sheer physical presence, had initially been skeptical about women in special operations. But Sarah's demonstration had forced him to reconsider his assumptions. "Listen up, gentlemen," Tank addressed his class of aspiring SEALs. "Yesterday, A female operator half the size of most of you took down a veteran SEAL commander in less than 5 seconds. Anyone want to tell me how that's possible? The candidates exchanged uncertain glances. They had all heard various versions of the story, but most were struggling to understand how such a thing could happen. Seaman recruit Marcus Williams, a former college wrestler, raised his hand tentatively. Chief, maybe it was just luck? Tank's expression hardened. Luck? Son, I've seen the video. What happened was pure technique and training. That woman executed a perfect entry, redirection, and takedown against an opponent who outweighed her by 80 pounds. There wasn't an ounce of luck involved. He walked among the candidates, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. This is a lesson about assumptions, people. You assume that bigger means stronger, that male means more capable, that rank means superiority in all areas. Master Chief Martinez just proved that all those assumptions can get you embarrassed and taken down. The class listened intently as Tank continued his impromptu lecture. In the teams, we talk about being humble and teachable. But how many of you are really willing to learn from someone who doesn't look like what you think a warrior should look like? Back in Coronado, Sarah was dealing with the aftermath of her sudden fame in her own way. She had always preferred to let her work speak for itself, and the intense attention was somewhat uncomfortable. But she also recognized the responsibility that came with her new visibility. Captain Michael Torres, Sarah's commanding officer, called her into his office 3 days after the incident. Torres was a respected leader who had worked hard to create an inclusive environment in his unit, and he was both proud of Sarah's performance and concerned about the potential complications. Martinez, he said as she took a seat across from his desk, I want to discuss how we handle the attention this incident has generated. Sir, I'm prepared to accept any consequences for my actions, Sarah replied formally. Torres smiled. Consequences? Master Chief, you've probably done more for women's integration into special operations in 5 seconds than years of policy changes and sensitivity training. The question is how we leverage this moment constructively. He leaned forward in his chair. I've been contacted by training commands across all service branches asking if you'd be willing to conduct demonstrations and instruction. There's also interest from the Defense Department's Office of Diversity and Inclusion about using your story in official training materials. Sarah considered this carefully. She had always been focused on being an operator first and a symbol second, but she understood that her actions had thrust her into a larger role whether she wanted it or not. Sir, I'm willing to contribute to professional development initiatives, but I want to make sure the focus remains on skill and technique rather than just gender politics. Agreed, Torres replied. In fact, that's exactly the approach we want to take. This isn't about proving a point. It's about demonstrating that excellence comes in many forms and that good training and technique can overcome physical disadvantages. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Torres' aide entered with a concerned expression. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Commander Thompson is in the building, and he's asking to speak with Master Chief Martinez. Sarah and Torres exchanged glances. Thompson had been suspended pending investigation, so his presence at the facility was unexpected and potentially problematic. Where is he now? Torres asked. Waiting in conference room B, sir. He seems agitated. Torres stood up. Martinez, you don't have to speak with him, especially not without a witness or legal representation present. Sarah considered her options. Part of her wanted to avoid any further confrontation with Thompson, but another part recognized that this might be an opportunity to address the situation directly and professionally. Sir, I'll speak with him, but I'd prefer to have you present as a witness. Torres nodded. Absolutely. Let's see what he has to say. The walk to conference room B felt longer than usual as Sarah prepared herself for what was likely to be an uncomfortable conversation. She had no idea what Thompson's emotional state might be or what he hoped to accomplish by seeking her out. When they entered the conference room, Thompson was pacing by the window, his back to the door. He turned as they entered, and Sarah could see immediately that the past few days had taken a toll on him. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and his eyes had the look of a man who hadn't been sleeping well. Master Chief, Thompson said, his voice carefully controlled. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Sarah remained standing near the door, with Captain Torres positioned between her and Thompson. Commander, what can I do for you? Thompson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that revealed his inner turmoil. I wanted to. He stopped and started again. I owe you an apology. The admission seemed to surprise Thompson himself. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system. I've spent the last 3 days thinking about what happened, Thompson continued, and I've had to face some truths about myself that I didn't want to acknowledge. He looked directly at Sarah for the first time since they had entered the room. I was wrong, not just about challenging you to that confrontation, but about everything I said and did leading up to it. I let my own insecurities and prejudices drive me to behave in a way that was unprofessional and unacceptable. Sarah listened carefully, trying to gauge the sincerity of Thompson's words. Apologies from bullies were often tactical maneuvers rather than genuine expressions of remorse. I know this doesn't fix anything, Thompson went on. I know my behavior affected not just you, but other women in the service who were watching how I treated you. I let down the teams, the Navy, and my own values. Captain Torres spoke up for the first time. Commander, while I appreciate you taking responsibility for your actions, you should know that your behavior is under official investigation. Anything you say here could be part of that process. Thompson nodded. I understand, sir, but I needed to say this directly to Master Chief Martinez, regardless of the official consequences. He turned back to Sarah. You demonstrated something that day that I should have recognized long ago. True strength isn't about intimidating people or using size and rank to dominate others. It's about skill, professionalism, and having the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Sarah remained composed, but she was genuinely surprised by the depth of Thompson's apparent self-reflection. Commander, I accept your apology, but the real test will be whether you apply these insights to how you treat others going forward. You're right, Thompson agreed. I've asked for reassignment to a non-leadership position while I work on addressing these issues. I think I need to step back and figure out how to be a better officer and a better person. The meeting concluded shortly after, with Thompson leaving as quietly as he had arrived. Sarah and Captain Torres remained in the conference room, both processing the unexpected encounter. What do you think? Torres asked. Genuine remorse or damage control? Sarah considered the question carefully. Honestly, sir, I think it was a little of both. But the fact that he sought me out directly and took full responsibility suggests he might be serious about changing his behavior. Either way, Torres replied, it doesn't change the investigation or the consequences he'll face. But it might indicate that some good can come out of this situation beyond just your demonstration of excellent technique. As they left the conference room, Sarah reflected on the complexity of the situation she found herself in. What had started as a simple response to workplace harassment had evolved into something much larger, a catalyst for conversations about leadership, respect, and what it truly meant to be a professional warrior. The incident was becoming a case study in military leadership courses, a topic of discussion in congressional hearings about women in combat, and a source of inspiration for female service members around the world. But for Sarah, the most important outcome remained the simplest. She had stood up for herself and proven that skill and preparation could overcome any disadvantage. The story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for changes that would extend far beyond one training facility in Coronado. Sarah Martinez had not only won a physical confrontation, she had sparked a conversation about the future of military service that would continue long after her own career had ended. 6 months after the incident that had made her famous throughout the military community, Master Chief Sarah Martinez found herself standing in the Pentagon, preparing to brief a room full of senior officers about combat training methodologies and integration of diverse operators and special operations units. The invitation to speak at the Joint Chiefs of Staff quarterly review had come as a surprise, but Sarah understood that her story had evolved beyond personal vindication into something with strategic implications for military policy and training. The 5-second confrontation with Commander Thompson had become a touchstone for discussions about maximizing human potential in military operations. As she waited in the briefing room, Sarah reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. The months following the incident had been a whirlwind of speaking engagements, training demonstrations, and policy discussions. She had maintained her operational duties while also serving as an unofficial ambassador for excellence in military training. The door opened, and Admiral Patricia Hayes entered, followed by a parade of stars and eagles representing every branch of the military. Sarah came to attention as the senior officers took their seats around the polished conference table. "At ease, Master Chief," Admiral Hayes said with a slight smile. "Please take a seat. We're here to learn from you today, not to conduct a formal inspection." As Sarah settled into her chair, she noticed General Marcus Webb, the Army's representative, studying her with undisguised curiosity. She had heard that Webb had been initially skeptical about women in combat roles, but recent reports suggested his views had evolved considerably. Admiral Hayes began the session by providing context for Sarah's presence. "Ladies and gentlemen, Master Chief Martinez has become something of a case study in operational effectiveness and training methodology. Her background and recent experiences provide valuable insights into how we can optimize our human resources across all special operations communities." She gestured to Sarah. "Master Chief, please tell us about your training philosophy and how you prepared for the challenges you've faced in your career." Sarah had given this presentation dozens of times over the past months, but never to an audience of this seniority and influence. She took a breath and began. "Admiral, Generals, thank you for the opportunity to share my experiences. I want to start by emphasizing that what happened 6 months ago wasn't about proving a point about gender. It was about demonstrating the importance of comprehensive training, tactical thinking, and professional preparation." She clicked to her first slide, which showed training statistics from various special operations programs. "My approach to preparation has always been based on the principle that you must train your weaknesses while maximizing your strengths. Physical size and strength are obviously important in combat operations, but they're only part of the equation." General Webb leaned forward. "Master Chief, help me understand something. Commander Thompson was an experienced operator with significant combat deployments. How does someone with your physical specifications gain a decisive advantage over someone with his background?" It was exactly the question Sarah had been expecting, and one she had answered countless times in various forums. "Sir, the answer lies in understanding the difference between raw physical capability and applied technique under stress. Commander Thompson relied primarily on size and strength, which made his approach predictable and vulnerable to technical counters." She advanced to the next slide, which showed a breakdown of combat effectiveness factors. "My training focused on speed, precision, timing, and leverage, factors that can multiply effectiveness regardless of physical size. When someone depends too heavily on intimidation and brute force, they often neglect the technical skills that are actually decisive in close-quarter situations." Admiral Hayes nodded approvingly. "What specific training methodologies did you employ to develop these capabilities?" "Ma'am, I sought instruction from the best available sources, regardless of whether they were within traditional military channels. I studied with martial arts masters, Olympic-level athletes, and specialists in biomechanics and sports psychology. The key was integrating these diverse approaches into a comprehensive system tailored to my specific strengths and challenges." The presentation continued for nearly an hour, with Sarah fielding detailed questions about training protocols, psychological preparation, and the broader implications of her approach for military education. The senior officers were clearly impressed by both her technical knowledge and her ability to articulate complex concepts clearly. General Rebecca Santos, representing the Air Force, asked about the impact of the incident on other female service members. "Master Chief, we've seen significant increases in applications for special operations training from female candidates since your story became public. How do we manage expectations while encouraging qualified candidates to pursue these roles?" Sarah had given considerable thought to this question. "General, I think it's important to emphasize that my success came from years of dedicated preparation and training, not from any inherent advantages. Female candidates should be encouraged to pursue these roles, but They need to understand the commitment required to excel. She paused, then added, at the same time, we need to ensure that our training programs are designed to develop each operator's maximum potential rather than assuming that one-size-fits-all approaches are optimal. Different body types and capabilities can be advantages in different tactical situations. The briefing concluded with Admiral Hayes asking about recommendations for policy changes and training improvements. Sarah had prepared extensively for this question, knowing that her answer could influence military training for years to come. Admiral, I recommend 3 main areas of focus. First, we should expand our definition of combat effectiveness to include technical proficiency, tactical creativity, and adaptability under stress. Second, we should ensure that our training programs are designed to maximize individual potential rather than conforming everyone to a single standard. Third, we should create mentorship and support systems that help all operators, regardless of background, develop their capabilities to the fullest extent possible. As the meeting concluded and the senior officers filed out, Admiral Hayes asked Sarah to remain behind for a private conversation. Master Chief, Hayes said once they were alone, I want to discuss your future career path. Your performance over the past months has been exceptional, and there's several opportunities we'd like you to consider. Sarah listened as Hayes outlined potential assignments that would leverage her newfound expertise in training and human development. There were opportunities to lead new training initiatives, to serve as a liaison with other military branches, or to transition into policy development roles. Admiral, I appreciate these opportunities, but I want to ensure that I maintain my operational edge. My credibility comes from being an active operator, not just someone who talks about operations. Hayes smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. What if I told you there was an opportunity to do both, to lead groundbreaking training initiatives while remaining operationally current? The opportunity Hayes described was intriguing. A new joint training center that would bring together the best operators from all service branches to develop and test innovative training methodologies. Sarah would lead the Close Quarters Combat Development Program while maintaining her certification and participating in operational missions. As Sarah left the Pentagon that day, she felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. The conversation had confirmed that her story had catalyzed real change in how the military thought about human potential and training optimization. But the real validation came from the messages she received daily from service members around the world. Women who had been inspired to pursue challenging careers, men who had reconsidered their assumptions about capability and strength, and commanders who had changed their approach to developing their personnel. The incident with Commander Thompson had lasted only 5 seconds, but its impact was continuing to grow and evolve. Sarah had proven that standing up to bullies and harassers wasn't just possible, it could serve as a catalyst for positive change throughout an entire organization. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at the new Joint Training Facility in North Carolina, watching a diverse group of special operations candidates work through the Close Quarters Combat curriculum she had helped design. The program emphasized technical proficiency, tactical creativity, and adaptability, the same principles that had served her so well in her confrontation with Thompson. Among the candidates was Lieutenant Amy Foster, a young Marine officer who had cited Sarah's story as her inspiration for pursuing special operations training. Foster was smaller than Sarah, but she demonstrated the same commitment to technical excellence and mental preparation that had become the hallmark of the new training approach. Master Chief, Foster said during a training break, I wanted to thank you for showing us that it's possible to succeed in this field regardless of what others might think about your capabilities. Sarah watched as Foster returned to the training mat, executing techniques with precision and confidence. It was exactly the kind of outcome she had hoped for when she made the decision to accept Thompson's challenge 6 months earlier. The ripple effects continued to spread. Commander Thompson, who had completed anger management and leadership training as part of his disciplinary process, had been reassigned to a training role where he was working to help other officers avoid the mistakes he had made. His transformation wasn't complete, but early reports suggested genuine progress. More importantly, The incident had sparked institutional changes that went far beyond individual careers. Training programs across all service branches were being redesigned to emphasize technical proficiency and tactical adaptability. Leadership development courses now included modules on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. And recruitment efforts were specifically targeting diverse candidates who might bring unique capabilities to special operations roles. Sarah's story had become required reading in military leadership courses, not as an example of gender relations, but as a case study in how individual excellence could drive institutional change. The lesson wasn't about women defeating men. It was about preparation defeating assumption, skill defeating size, and professionalism defeating bullying. As she watched the new generation of operators train with techniques and principles she had helped develop, Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The 5 seconds that had changed her life had also changed the military's understanding of what was possible when talent was recognized and developed regardless of its packaging. The story that had started with harassment and confrontation had evolved into something much more positive, a foundation for building better warriors, better leaders, and a better military. And it all began with one person's decision to stand up and prove that true strength came not from size or intimidation, but from skill, preparation, and the courage to do what was right. 2 years after the confrontation that had changed her life and career, Master Chief Sarah Martinez stood on the deck of the USS Leyte Gulf as it cut through the dark waters of the Arabian Sea. The Joint Special Operations mission she was leading represented the culmination of everything she had worked toward, a chance to put her training innovations into practice in a real-world operational environment. The mission briefing had been straightforward. A high-value target was being held in a compound in a hostile territory, and intelligence suggested that conventional assault approaches would result in significant casualties. The Joint Task Force Sarah commanded included operators from all service branches, selected not just for their individual skills, but for their ability to work as an integrated team using the tactical methodologies she had helped develop. Among her team members was Lieutenant Amy Foster, the young Marine officer who had been inspired by Sarah's story to pursue special operations training. Foster had excelled in the new training programs and had specifically requested assignment to Sarah's unit. Also on the team was Petty Officer First Class James Washington, the SEAL who had witnessed Sarah's confrontation with Thompson and had since become one of her strongest advocates within the teams. As Sarah reviewed the mission parameters one final time, she reflected on how different this operation felt from the traditional special operations missions she had participated in earlier in her career. The team dynamics were fundamentally different. There was less emphasis on individual heroics and more focus on leveraging each operator's unique capabilities to achieve the collective objective. The tactical plan they had developed capitalized on the diverse skill sets of the team members. Foster's small stature and advanced technical climbing skills would allow her to access entry points that would be impossible for larger operators. Washington's expertise in close-quarters combat would anchor their defensive capabilities. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, an Army Ranger with advanced language skills and cultural knowledge, would handle communication with local assets. 5 minutes to insertion came the voice of the helicopter pilot over the comm system. Sarah keyed her radio. Final equipment check. Everyone ready. The responses came back crisp and confident. This was a team that had trained together extensively using the integrated methodologies Sarah had helped pioneer. They understood each other's capabilities intimately and had developed the kind of seamless coordination that could only come from shared training philosophy and mutual respect. As the helicopter approached the target area, Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was the moment when all the training, all the preparation, and all the lessons learned from her confrontation with Thompson would be put to the ultimate test. The insertion went flawlessly. The team moved through the darkness with practiced precision, each member contributing their specialized skills to navigate the complex terrain and security obstacles surrounding the target compound. Sarah's role was to coordinate the overall operation while serving as the primary close-quarters combat specialist for the assault phase. The compound layout was exactly as intelligence had described, but the team's approach differed significantly from traditional special operations doctrine. Instead of relying on overwhelming force and speed, they used stealth, precision, and tactical creativity to neutralize threats and achieve their objectives with minimal noise and disturbance. Foster's technical climbing skills allowed her to access a second-story window that provided a perfect overwatch position. From there, she could provide real-time intelligence about guard movements and interior layouts. Santos used her cultural knowledge and language skills to interact with local civilians in a way that gathered additional intelligence while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. When they reached the final assault phase, Sarah's close-quarters combat expertise proved decisive. The team encountered resistance from guards who were well-armed, but poorly trained. Using the techniques she had demonstrated against Thompson, Sarah was able to neutralize multiple threats quickly and quietly, allowing the team to reach their objective without alerting the wider compound security. The rescue itself was textbook perfect. The hostage was extracted safely, intelligence materials were secured, and the team extracted without casualties. But, more importantly, the mission demonstrated the effectiveness of the integrated training approach Sarah had spent 2 years developing. As they flew back to the ship, Washington keyed his radio to Sarah's private channel. "Master Chief, that was the smoothest operation I've ever been part of. The way this team worked together was incredible." Sarah smiled in the darkness of the helicopter cabin. That's what happens when you train people to maximize their individual strengths while working as an integrated unit. Everyone contributed something unique and essential. The mission debriefing the following day revealed just how significant their success had been. The rescued hostage provided intelligence that led to the disruption of a major terrorist network. The materials they had captured gave analysts insights into enemy capabilities and intentions that would inform operations for months to come. But for Sarah, the most meaningful feedback came from her team members and the operational commanders who had overseen the mission. The integrated approach to special operations that she had helped develop was being recognized as a fundamental advancement in how elite units could operate. Admiral Hayes, who had flown to the ship to conduct the debrief personally, pulled Sarah aside after the formal session concluded. "Master Chief," Hayes said, "what you've accomplished goes far beyond a single successful mission. You've demonstrated a new model for special operations that maximizes human potential in ways we never fully explored before." She paused, looking out at the endless expanse of ocean surrounding the ship. The confrontation with Thompson was a catalyst, but what you've built since then, the training methodologies, the team integration concepts, the leadership philosophy, that's what's really changing how we approach these operations. Hayes turned back to Sarah. "I have a proposition for you. The Defense Department is establishing a new Special Operations Development Center, and they want you to lead it. This would be a chance to institutionalize everything you've learned and developed over the past 2 years." The offer was both exciting and daunting. Leading the new development center would give Sarah the opportunity to influence special operations training and doctrine for decades to come. But it would also mean stepping away from operational duties and focusing primarily on institutional development. "Admiral, I'm honored by the opportunity, but I need to think carefully about the implications. My effectiveness has always come from maintaining operational currency while developing new approaches." "I understand your concern," Hayes replied. "But consider this. The methodologies you've developed are already being implemented across multiple commands. What we need now is someone who can systematize these approaches and ensure they become permanent parts of how we train and deploy our forces." That evening, Sarah stood alone on the ship's deck, looking out at the stars and contemplating the decision before her. The journey that had started with a 5-second confrontation on a training mat had led her to this moment. The opportunity to fundamentally reshape how the military developed and deployed its most elite operators. She thought about all the people who had been affected by her story. The women who had been inspired to pursue challenging careers, the men who had reconsidered their assumptions about capability and strength, the commanders who had changed their approach to developing their personnel. She also thought about Commander Thompson, who had completed his rehabilitation program and was now serving as an instructor in leadership development courses. Their paths had crossed again several months earlier at a joint training exercise, and the transformation in his approach and attitude had been remarkable. The incident that had nearly ended his career had ultimately made him a better officer and a better person. Most importantly, she thought about the future generations of operators who would be trained using the methodologies she had helped develop. They would enter a military culture that valued technical excellence, tactical creativity, and individual capability over traditional assumptions about what warriors should look like. The next morning, Sarah requested a meeting with Admiral Hayes to discuss the leadership opportunity in detail. As she prepared for the conversation, she realized that her decision was already made. The confrontation with Thompson had taught her that sometimes the most important battles were won not through physical force, but through the courage to stand up for what was right and the determination to create positive change. Taking on the leadership of the new development center would be her way of ensuring that the lessons learned from that 5-second confrontation would continue to benefit future generations of service members. It would be her opportunity to institutionalize the principle that excellence came in many forms and that true strength was measured not by size or intimidation, but by skill, preparation, and professionalism. "Admiral," Sarah said as she entered Hayes' office, "I accept your offer, but I have one condition. We designed this center to maintain direct operational connections. The training and methodologies we develop must be constantly tested and refined through real-world application." Hayes smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. The most effective innovations come from the intersection of theoretical development and practical application." As they discussed the details of the new assignment, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey that had begun with harassment and confrontation had evolved into something much more meaningful, an opportunity to build a better military and a more effective approach to developing human potential. The 5 seconds that had changed her life had become the foundation for changes that would affect thousands of service members for years to come. What started as one person's decision to stand up to a bully had become a catalyst for institutional transformation. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah's story had proven that individual actions, when grounded in skill, preparation, and moral courage, could create ripple effects that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. She had not only won a physical confrontation, she had demonstrated that standing up for what was right could change the world, one person and one moment at a time. The confrontation with Commander Thompson would always be remembered as the moment that launched Sarah's remarkable career and influence. But the true legacy of those 5 seconds lay in the countless future operators who would benefit from the training innovations and leadership philosophy that emerged from that brief but decisive encounter on a training mat in Coronado, California.